Welcome to the Skeptic Canary radio show with Tom Williamson.
Hello everyone, it is Wednesday the 23rd of July 2014. You are watching/listening to episode 59 of the Skeptic Canary show. I'm Tom Williamson from skepticcanary.com, and this week we have a Skeptic Inc. special. We have founder of the Skeptic Inc. network, Ed Clint.
Howdy, Tom.
Hello, and we have Zach, who blogs at a blog whose name we're trying to work out this minute.
It's Nortung, let's say, yeah.
Okay, it's a German word. It comes from an opera. It kind of looks like no tongue if you were to look at it.
It's a sword from it's a Wagner opera, and there's a dragon who's guarding all this gold. He's very greedy. And Siegfried, the hero, comes in and stabs the dragon with the sword. And the sword is, well, there's a bit of backstory behind that, but the sword is called Nortung. And that's the name of my blog. It's supposed to be a political blog, you know, greed, the symbol of greed and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Okay. And you are currently based in Taiwan at the moment.
Yes. It's Taiwan behind me, yeah.
Right.
We just survived a typhoon yesterday. In fact, today was a day off, because it was a deadly typhoon outside. I'm still here. So.
Good. That's important.
Maybe
right, fair enough. So you're in Taiwan, I'm here in Liverpool, England, and Ed is over in LA. So this is probably the most international show we've ever done, broadcasting on 3 continents. How exciting is that? Okay, Ed, so tell us a little bit about the Skeptic Inc. network. Tell us how it got started and the goals you had in mind for it.
Sure, Tom. So we started about 2 years ago, and I got together with John Loftus, and at the time, both of us, and I think many people that call themselves skeptics, felt like there was a niche that was unfilled. There was a kind of a poverty of good and, shall I say, non-political skeptic websites or discussion that was going around. So at the time, people that are in the know will know that there was a lot of sort of infighting. Different skeptics and secularists were kind of engaged in some bitter political kind of fights, right? And so it occurred to us that, like, if for the person who wasn't really interested in engaging in that, maybe they liked the content on those sites as well, but if they just weren't interested in that and just kind of wanted more of the critical thinking, the skepticism, that there wasn't really a website for that. There are the other niches filled. There's great websites, you know, like Friendly Atheist and Patheos, but that's more, you know, secularist. And there's kind of specialist skeptics out there like Michael Shermer's group, but there's not really community there. They just sort of publish, you know, great analyses and articles on topics. But there really wasn't a great, you know, community-based skepticism website with kind of ensemble cast to have different voices. So that's what John Loftus and I set out to produce. We wanted to get a bunch of different voices together. We wanted it to be about the skepticism. We wanted to be about the content and less about other distractions that occasionally crop up and kind of occupy that niche. And I think a lot of the success we've enjoyed has been proof of that concept, that there's definitely a desire for that.
No drama. Excellent. One thing I have noticed about the site is there seems to be quite an emphasis on philosophy, which is quite unusual for a skeptic network. So again, was that an aim of the site to encourage philosophical discussions among skeptics?
Not really. I mean, I don't like philosophers. I think we have far too many. I'm just messing with you, Zach. No, I don't think it was intentional, but I don't know. That's just kind of who answered the call in some cases, and kind of who John and I knew, and it kind of just came down that way. People that a lot of the people that are very interested in talking about these topics, happen to be philosophers, and both, John and I were really interested in having professional type people with a background relevant to what they're talking about, some kind of expertise that they could speak from. And so philosophers are a very logical and sensible part of that. Now, the proportion of the site that it occupies, I think, is just kind of happenstance. But I'm very thrilled at all the people that we do have. They're all, I think, extremely strong contributors to the site. So I'm not gonna complain any.
Okay, and the reason I invited you guys on the show tonight is because you guys have put together your first book, a collection of essays, writings from your contributors. Would you say?
Yes, we have 13 essays. They're all original, written for the book, with the exception of my chapter, which is about 40 or 50% previous content, but heavily revised. But everything else is kind of brand new just for the book. And there isn't a theme because this is our first book, so we kind of wanted to have this be a kind of introduction to Skeptic Inc. for people who aren't familiar with us. The market for books is quite different than for blogs, so lots of people that will probably see the book haven't ever been to our website. So we wanted it to be an introduction. Here's a bit of these different voices from these very different authors that we have, rather than having a theme or a topic or answer this question kind of thing. So it's kind of a smorgasbord, and I think that makes for an excellent book too, because it's not it's very digestible, easy to read. You can kind of sit down and take in an essay and in a relatively short amount of time, and so that for me, I know the kinds of books I enjoy. I often like those kinds of anthologies.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Now, you are an evolutionary psychologist, and your chapter is essentially about evolutionary psychology. So, as a skeptic, do you still encounter quite a lot of hostility towards evolutionary psychology?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. You don't see it as much within academia, but you do outside or from places like philosophy. But that said, it's definitely, from my perspective, gotten more muted, more cautious, less brash, less aggressive than it has been in previous years, which has been very good to see. But it's very, very easy for anybody to just put just Google like evolutionary psychology, and I'm sure some of the first things you see are media pieces, a lot of new media stuff that are still very. They're not just critical or censorious, which is fine, but you see rehashing of the rather tired and debunked claims from years or decades ago still cropping up. So you do see plenty of it. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. I think that there's always a lag in any kind of probably most fields between what's happening in research and what's happening in the academy and what people know about, because they're not part of those discussions. They're not at those conferences, so it takes time for the sort of the status quo to kind of filter out. So it's very interesting for me to see the more aggressive voices that are out there today, because I know that they're out of step, right? Their information is not through any fault of their own, but just because they're lay people or they're maybe journalists. They're out of step with what the science actually is and what the academics are actually doing, and they're going off of information that's 5 or 10 years old, and it's going to filter down, like they'll catch up, but it's going to be in some cases very amusing to watch that process unfold.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So are you saying that with evolutionary psychology, there's on one side the academic evolutionary psychology, where they're going for all the latest data and coming up with new theories, and there's the more pop side of evolutionary psychology, which is a lot easier to attack, as it were?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, the media does a pretty bad job of most science coverage that you can think of. If somebody did a tally of like how many terrible, you know, articles on genetics there are out there, gene found for preferring Coke over Pepsi, gene found for this and that, which is all just, there's a lot of nonsense like that, and yet nobody ever says like, look at all this terrible, media coverage. Genetics must be just bullshit, and but you definitely could do that. That said, I think that there's lots of really good coverage, and it's part of my chapter for those that have seen it. I mentioned it, I think, at the very end. There's very good coverage out there for you to find, if you're looking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, Zach, let's have a. Oh, now someone's just joined us. It's Jono. Hello.
Oh my dear. Apologies. Some slight technical errors there. I do apologise. I am here with you, so everything's fine.
Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, Jono blogs at A Tippling Philosopher, and you may remember him from a previous episode of the show. Jono's another philosopher.
Don't say that like it's a derogatory sort of label.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But we're quite nicely balanced now. We've got two scientists and two philosophers on the show at the moment. And we're just discussing the contributions from each of the authors to the book 13 Reasons to Doubt, available on Amazon. Get the plug in there.
A cracking read it is. Yeah, well done.
Yes, absolutely. Now your chapter is about free will. Now we've talked about free will on the show before, and it's a huge subject, and it's something that scientists have got to deal with. It's not just a religious question. So can you give us a brief summary of your chapter?
Yeah, sure. So just before I start, though, I think it's probably worth noting that just for the records, science is a subset of philosophy. So in actual fact, I own you scientists.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah. So free will. So I find free will, like I said to you before, I find free will fascinating because it affects us all. Whether you're theistic, atheistic, agnostic, or whatever, everyone either thinks or acts as if they have free will. And so it almost, again, like I said to you before, the whole religion debate supervenes on the free will discussion. So if you believe in a personal God that judges you, then you've got to believe in free will. So I think it's super, super important. But the question I address in my chapter is, so given that free will is an illusion, if we assume that, does this make our lives any better? And I put forward the case that it certainly made my life better. My life is richer for having this greater understanding of free will, or the lack of free will, this idea that I now really seek causality out in everything I do and everything I look to understand has made me a better person. And it can make the world a better place if we accept the illusion of free will. Now, I didn't go into too much detail in looking at the other side of the coin, which is actually there is some research to say that not that you're high philosophical understanding, but some people that approach life with a kind of deterministic outlook, a fatalistic outlook, often have higher stress levels, are more depressed, and there is some scientific research that would go against maybe what I say in that chapter. But I think from a philosophical point of view, when you actually look at the philosophy of free will and actually say, right, I understand this, I know that causality works in such a way, so therefore I've got this understanding of how the world works. How am I going to deal with that, and will I make my life and those around me better for it?
Right. Okay. Very interesting. One thing you could say, you seem to sort of put determinism and fatalism in the same basket. Is that an okay thing to do from a?
No. Well, I was sort of treating the idea that so the research that's been done to show that certain people with a deterministic outlook have this this negative effect on their lives because they have this more naive approach to the whole discussion, which is, oh, it's fatalistic and these things are decided for me and therefore I can't really influence matters, rather than believing, yes, I couldn't have done otherwise, but I'm kind of authoring my future, which is a kind of empowered approach to the free will debate or the determinism debate, rather than fatalistic, where it's like there's nothing I can do, I'm just going to give myself up to the vagaries. I think that's quite an important distinction there, and it's very much has its psychological implications.
Right.
Having said that, fatalism is a big challenge for determinists, psychologically.
Okay. It's all kind of new to me, being a scientist, because
Right.
you know, us PhDs, we are doctors of philosophy, but not quite in the way of understanding philosophy, which I've always thought was really strange. Because you can be a PhD in philosophy, you can be a doctor of philosophy.
Yes.
Which is very, very odd. Very odd. Okay. We haven't heard much from Zach yet. Zach, your chapter is about David Hume, I believe.
Yeah, well, in particular, miracles. So he's got this famous argument about miracles, and it was really just a chapter to say what the strengths of the argument are, rather than sort of, because one possibility is you can look at all the counter arguments and then weigh up against those and say how they fail, but you need quite a lot of space for that. So you either need to consider one or. So in the end, I just decided to go for, here's what I think the argument says. Here's a way of thinking about it. And then at the end, I say what it means for skepticism. So because Hume doesn't really talk about. It would relate to skepticism because he's talking about things like a resurrection of a human, which tends to be religious, but I suppose you could take the Randy challenge with something like that, and things like worldwide darkness, which isn't necessarily religious. So what I'm trying to do is argue for what does he mean by a miracle? How should we think about miracles? So they've got this kind of dual nature. So in one sense, we've got the laws of nature as they are, and then the miracle comes along and changes something, so that now the laws of nature have been violated in some way, and that's one part of a miracle. And the other part is there has to be the volition of some kind of agent. It can't just be a weird occurrence. It can't just be gravity caused everything to attract each other, and suddenly for 10 seconds it was repulsion instead. Because that wouldn't really be a miracle necessarily, it'd just be a weird anomaly. So a miracle is something where someone says, I'm going to resurrect this human because they're important. I'm going to make this statue cry as a symbol of, I don't know why someone would do that, but so it has to have these two parts to it to really qualify as a miracle. And that, in a way, undermines it, because take resurrection, for instance. If someone resurrects, then what is the purpose of that? So if someone's resurrected, the god or whoever, the supernatural agent, has come along and said this person is the one who should be resurrected. The reason is normally that it forms a system of religion. It's got people's interests at heart, and this provides evidence against it, because we are familiar with people fabricating things for their own interests, for their own organizations, for their own religions, and so that provides evidence against the miracle. And Hume's already said that we're always performing these experiments. We're always seeing evidence against miracles in our day-to-day life. We see miracles not happening. We see laws proceeding in the way they're supposed to. The only evidence
heal amputees.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We've got 1 million experiments of amputees being healed, and they've all gone one way. So amputees don't get healed. And if you hear a testimony, you've got to work out, well, is this the first time an amputee has got healed, or is it just one of the many times that someone's told a lie? well, it's a pretty easy one to answer when you think of it like that. And so I think Hume's argument is quite a powerful one, and there are counter arguments against it that try to sort of undermine it, and there are little niggles here and there. You can say, well, does this count as a miracle, and what would? But I think generally it's a pretty defeating objection to people who want you to believe in miracles on the basis of testimony. Of course, it doesn't really apply to seeing a miracle necessarily, unless you're going to treat your own experience as a kind of testimony. So I say, well, I saw it, so and you can say, well, my eyes were testifying in some way, but generally he's concerned with other people's reports of miracles, and that's the way we encounter most of this stuff. We don't see these things happening ourselves. We hear about, well, this person said his second cousin saw a ghost in the backyard, so it must be true, and we're supposed to evaluate this kind of thing.
I think in the case of miracles, it's to me it's the pretty obvious situation whereby if you're a part of a religion or a cult or whatnot, you generally believe your own miracle claims. But usually, if we talk about the old Abrahamic faith, then let's take Christianity, where you're looking back at 2,000 years ago and you're saying this and this miracle I believe this miracle happened. I believe this miracle happened. But realistically, the provenance of the evidence, of the sources, is very poor. So we've got 2,000-year-old texts which fail on this and this account, all the usual stuff. We don't know who wrote them, when they were written. They were pro-Jesus, they're ex post facto, all these issues. Yeah, but I believe them. Those are my miracles. So those Christian miracles are true. And yet we've got someone like Satya Sai Baba from India in the last sort of 3 decades, who's done shed loads of miracles which are better accounted contemporaneously and are actually believed by more people now than the original Jesus followers believed back 2,000 years ago. And yet those Christians, for example, or any other religion, don't believe the Sai Baba miracles, and they're actually better attested to. So there's just in that example, you've got huge double standards, and I think the case for miracles is just tenuous at best.
I think it's interesting what the importance of miracles throughout the centuries in Christian thought and theistic thought highlight about the psychology of believers, because a lot of atheists will say, well, Christians believe on faith and they're not interested in evidence, but that's really not true, because miracles are a kind of evidence. They're an appeal to an evidentiary process. I mean, we don't accept that evidence, but the nature of the argument is there is evidence that this thing exists. And by the way, that any other time that same person will say that they don't need evidence and they just have faith. But that's why miracles are important and why we're still talking about them, right?
Yeah, but I think that's necessary for something to count as a miracle as well. It would have to be evidence for a supernatural being. I mean, if you were to accept it, you wouldn't just be saying, I accept that miracle. You'd be saying, I accept now that there's evidence for this being. You'd be accepting the being too. And that's another thing you have to weigh up against the counterpoint, which is that someone told a fib or someone made a mistake or whatever.
I suppose the point is that if you are a naturalist, for example, and you think all that exists is a natural world and the natural laws, if a miracle takes place, it's within the framework of those natural laws. And so, as you say, it's by definition a kind of anomaly, which can and should be explicable through the natural laws, and therefore we just have some hidden variable, or we don't know X and Y and Z. And so, therefore, a miracle, almost by definition, implies or goes to prove or evidences a supreme or a supernatural being. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, if you have a definition of a miracle as something that does contravene the laws of nature, what about if you've got a different definition of a miracle? If you see nature itself as being miraculous, if, for example, you're the band Insane Clown Posse and everything's a miracle. Then,
well, isn't there something like a second-order miracle, or is it second-order miracle? I forget now. Whereby you've got a god actually purposefully using naturalistic tools, if you like, in order to do something. So, for example, Hurricane Katrina or whatever, you could say that's a miracle because God used that to deliver some kind of message and actually manipulated the natural state of affairs. Or so on and so forth, or set things up so that would happen, is in some kind of way miraculous, is one perhaps is another definition.
There's a big difference, I suppose, with that, because we're not only asked to, in both cases, we're asked to believe that God has done something or some agent has done something. But in the case of the second order ones, no one's really doubting that Hurricane Katrina happened. So it's a much weaker claim because they're claiming something that we already knew. We already accept that. They're just asking us to take the motivation for that thing as evidence for the miracle. And that one is harder to prove anyway, because in the case of resurrection, if they were resurrected and that happened, then that's pretty good evidence that the being's there. That Hurricane Katrina happening is no evidence at all, really, that the agent's there. You need some other argument to show that was why it happened, and I don't know how you could do that, really, because you have to know the mind of God or whatever.
Well, it's very ad hoc, isn't it? I mean, what's interesting within the context of the book, Zach's chapter is one of the ones that's closer to the idea of theism and religion and atheism and that whole religious debate. But and I don't know if you mentioned this at the beginning, Ed or Zach, but what this volume of the essays from the Skeptic Inc. writers is all about.
I'm back.
Hello? Am I back in there? What? Did I just drop out?
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened there. I think everyone dropped out.
Right.
Yeah. We are back now.
Sorry about that. So what I was just saying is that chapter was the closest to the religious debate, but actually this volume, and I say that because we're hoping for there to be further volumes, was more to do with scientific skepticism as a generalized idea, so that we have chapters on psychology, we have chapters on Ed's own chapter, which is actually looking at another skeptic and being skeptical of that skeptic's approach. So there's a whole range of chapters which aren't necessarily to do with theism, but Zach's is possibly the closest of all the chapters that deals with kind of religious ideals or ideas. Just sort of throw that in there.
Fantastic. Just let people know we are about halfway through the show, so if you want to get in touch with the show, you can via Twitter. I'm Skeptic Canary, or you can email tom@skepticcanary.com. Okay, great. One thing that I'm quite interested in with the Skeptic Inc. network is how it runs as a blog, as a blog network. So, for example, does each blogger have their own comment policy, or is there a site-wide one?
There is a site-wide one, but I think it's pretty permissive, and beyond that, people can have more restrictive policies if they wish. But, we have a purpose. We have a goal that we're trying to accomplish. So it's not the frontier. It's not anything goes wild, because that wouldn't be consistent with what we're trying to do, right? I think that doesn't lead to productive discourse. So I think that everybody who wants to or does write at Skeptic Inc. has to understand, like, there are these constraints because we have a purpose, and this isn't the Wild West.
Do you think that with comments and the idea of being able to respectfully disagree with each other, now I don't know about you, but in terms of where I'm coming from with science, if people didn't disagree with each other respectfully, then you wouldn't get any science done. So do you think that there are some people who have that as kind of a foreign idea, that they see any disagreement as hostility? Do you think that happens?
I think it's hugely important, disagreement. As far as myself as a philosopher goes, if I didn't put my ideas out there to be attacked, I wouldn't be able to know whether they were robust enough. Because you're just shouting at yourself, and this is what I believe. Full stop. But I want to be able to say, this is what I believe, and I want you guys to have a go at it, because then if there's any weaknesses there, you will find them out for me, and I will then build a stronger. I'll either forget that it's a bad idea, or I build a strong idea. And I think philosophy is exactly like the scientific method in that respect. You don't have a right to hold an opinion that's not been robustly challenged, I think, and made you look at that opinion and made you look at your own psychology of why you hold that as well, because at the end of the day, beliefs are pieces of psychology. So I think the comments are absolutely valid. I don't know about you, Zach, in philosophy, whether you feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think you pretty much said it. I mean, I think they should be encouraged rather than just permitted. It's not just a case of saying disagreement's okay, I'll allow it. It's a case of I want disagreement. I don't want to just simply say here's my view. That's it. What's the point? I mean, there's no point doing that. I don't want to just tell people what I think, because I mean, it's not interesting for me. I know what I think. I don't need to stick it on a page necessarily. The only time I care is when about putting it on a page is when I want people to come and challenge it. And I don't know. I think they haven't found me yet because I don't get that much disagreement. I don't think it's because I'm like right about everything. I just think the people that would disagree with me haven't.
I think it's quite important actually what you mentioned there. Like, I think putting stuff on paper is really, or on a blog, is really important to refining what you believe. It's the same as having a conversation with someone or an argument with someone. Like, that whole process of putting down your argument, of blogging or writing an essay or whatever, is really, really important, and it sorts out in your own head actually what you think. So yeah.
And actually, I was slightly wrong because I said there's no point writing your own opinion down if no one else sees it. But actually, yeah, you hit on something there, that it is good to collect your thoughts and to once you actually express them, that's when you really know if you thought about them correctly or not, because you can just have a jumble in your mind, and it's only when they're down on the page that you. But I think otherwise, it is definitely good to challenge them, to have them challenged.
And I think it's nice as well. I know that Ed and myself have recently had a few arguments on my blog. I wrote something about Islam that he took issue with, and we respectfully argue with each other, which is fantastic. And that's great when we are comfortable enough to have a go at each other's ideas on the blog network, and that's, I think, the sign of a healthy blog network.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Strong dissent, and I mean dissent from people who are sort of informed or thoughtful and so on, is one of the most valuable quantities in the universe as far as I'm concerned. I recently was criticized by another blog called Science, Sex, and the Ladies, Trisha Borowitz, and she wrote a full-length post criticizing something that I had written last year. And if you look at the comments, I thank her and I invite her to have an extended kind of exchange. And then I subsequently wrote a blog post responding to her, starting with what I think the good terms of engagement are. And I cite this as an example of like me bending over backwards quite deliberately, and I will say so because I value her contribution so much, what she offers as a thoughtful critic, as somebody who really disagrees with me and really seems to have an idea what she's talking about. I take that very seriously, and I'm terrifically excited when I see it, and so you can see a developing exchange between us on our two respective blogs unfolding.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in philosophy, you get this idea, I think Ed is touching on it there, of this Socratic dialectic approach where you're questioning each other until you're both. I mean, I've got a regular commenter on mine. He's actually a Christian theist, but we have these immensely large, and one of my other contributors, these immensely large debates, and it's just really Socratic, where you just aren't asking each other these questions and delving deeper into each other's psyche until you get to actually the core of what you're trying to say or what you believe, and that's really important.
I think there's a point to be made that this kind of discourse is often difficult in a lot of ways, right? That depends on sometimes familiarity with material, but more than that, there's an emotional component, right? It's hard, it's difficult, it's sometimes brutal, at least in research and science, as I'm sure it is in philosophy. You get disagreement constantly. You get criticism from your closest colleagues, from your advisor, from your friends. You will get a diet of it, and you better just be able to take it in stride or do something productive with it, because that all happens before the peer review or hostile reviews come in, and that's what makes it work. That's what makes it sing. That's what makes you better. It's what makes you smarter, essentially. But a lot of lay people don't understand that that's true. They don't necessarily understand that part of the deal is that it's emotionally difficult and sometimes requires courage. It requires courage to admit that you're wrong about something when you learn that you are, rather than just fighting it out further just because you can fight it. It takes courage to accept that somebody's made an excellent point and that you need time to digest it. And I'll back away from this talk right now, and I'll take some time, and maybe I'll come back. And a lot of people. They're not in these lines of work. They're not trained. They don't have the daily experiences. They're not able to do that, and so it can be difficult and frustrating, and possibly emotionally painful for them. I think it's well for bloggers, especially that are professionals, like some of the folks here, to understand that that's true, so that we have a certain amount of leeway and compassion for people who do stop to comment and participate in these discussions.
Do you think that people in the atheist, secular, skeptic sphere, whatever we're calling it, do you think people can be just as prone to uncritically accepting ideologies as anyone else?
That's a great question. And do you know what? One of the chapters in our book by Caleb Lack, Great Plains Skeptic, on the Skeptic Inc. network, is about cognitive biases. And it's a fantastic chapter. It's one of the early chapters in the book, and it takes you through some of the most common biases that we have. And the point is that we all have them. Now, the best you can do really is to be aware of these biases so that you can try and mitigate against them by just being aware, but you're never going to, unfortunately, be able to eradicate them. Now, there is some research to suggest that atheistic people or non-theistic people have a slightly higher propensity to be ratio analytic in their thinking styles. Okay, now you could say, what comes first? You know, does one dictate the other? What's the direction of causality there? But there's certainly an interesting idea that perhaps, certainly in some cognitive areas, maybe your more rational, non-theistic type people are actually slightly more rational, but essentially we are all prone to biases, and I think that's really important to know. Ed is the evolutionary psychologist, so maybe he can shed some light on that.
Yes, certainly. I mean, our many biases are well documented, but your question is being a skeptic, or sort of having that label, being self-identified, does it have an effect on how good you actually are at these things? I think very often it makes you worse, because it gives you a kind of security, like a sense of an inflated sense of, well, I know these fallacies, so I'm certainly not going to commit them, because that's how thinking works.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
It makes us more likely to do so. I think in general. I mean, there are individuals, variations in how this works out, but
speak for yourself, Ed. I'm pretty perfect, I thought.
Oh well, I stand corrected.
I think as well.
Actually, sorry.
I was going to say, skeptic doesn't mean. For me, I think when I call myself a skeptic, I don't mean that I treat everything skeptically. I believe everything on good evidence, and I don't make any emotional commitments to ideas and whatever. It just means it's a kind of, I believe this is the way I should act, but maybe I won't, and hopefully people will tell me when I don't. But I think maybe that's more towards what Ed was saying about you think you've got the security and you know it, that I know these fallacies, so I'm not going to commit them. That you think, well, I've called myself a skeptic, so I am one, and I'm going to take the skeptical view, and the thing I'm espousing is the skeptical view. Maybe it's not, and it's more of a disposition rather than a description of your acts, I guess.
Well, you slightly beat me to it, though. I was going to say that I was equivocating earlier on the term skeptic by sort of almost synonymously equating it with like non-theism, but of course there are plenty of theistic skeptics who have this. So I suppose the question is, what is a skeptic? We bandy that term around, and in fact we have the Skeptic Inc. network. What does it mean to be a skeptic? What is skepticism? I mean, in the book, the first chapter of the book, is by the blogger Humanisticus, Peter Ferguson, who writes a brief history of skepticism, which is really interesting to introduce you to the idea. But you know, I think sometimes it can be a lazy term these days for just atheism. A lot of people just throw that in as some kind of synonym, but really it's not. But then again, what is it? I mean, what would you define a skeptic as? Ed, what would you define a skeptic as?
Me, mostly. No, it's all about, I think, questioning and doubt. At least that being a default and mundane response to things for which they are not axiomatically true, or there's not already overwhelming evidence from a disinterested party's perspective. So that, I think, is skepticism to me, having an open channel, the centrality of empirical evidence, and that sort of thing. But if you guys want to comment with your own.
Well, my definition would be, because skepticism is a method, for me a skeptic would be someone who uses the skeptical method to ascertain knowledge. And where it becomes interesting for me is that if you're a skeptic and you're using the skeptical method, that says nothing about your morals or your philosophical outlook on life. So,
but there actually aren't methods, though, not in the strict sense of the word method. There's no, here's a claim now, and here's the method, and now anybody who puts this method to this claim will get to the same conclusion, and this will work for whatever claim we come up with. Now there are guidelines, there's rules of thumb, there's pitfalls that we can identify, but as far as I know, there's no discrete method of skepticism, is there?
Tom, I think
conflating it with the scientific method.
Yeah, Tom, I think you find that Ed's just got skeptical on your ass.
Nice one.
But I think the idea for me personally is that skepticism is all pervasive, which means that there's nothing in my philosophy, in my account of reality, that shouldn't be victim to being skeptical of. Now, I have in my journey through ideas, I have doubted and now disbelieve in libertarian free will, right? I have actually I'm now a sort of moral nihilist, depending on how you define all your terms. I doubt whether universals and ideas can exist outside of our brains, and all these kind of things. I apply a skepticism to to literally everything, even down to what is an idea. And I think this enables you to start then building from a bottom up. I really do believe a bottom up construction of reality. When you find out what the building bricks of ideas are, you can then start saying, I'm not going to come into this with a conclusion that my moral philosophy is this, or that in order to live cohesively I need free will to be true, therefore free will is true, and go bottom down. It's like, right, what are ideas made of? Literally the building bricks of philosophy. What are ideas made of? Abstract ideas. What's this? Let's build up from there. And do you know what? I'm gonna follow the scientific method as well. I'm gonna build up this evidential framework with philosophy, and I will build up to my conclusions, not work down from my conclusions. I think that's, to me, what skepticism helps me do.
Nobody actually uses the scientific method in skepticism. I mean, I'm familiar with the method pretty well. I think it's not really what we do. We take ideas from that method, but we don't actually deploy it in any meaningful way, I don't think.
Well, okay.
It's a bit like the Cartesian method, isn't it, Jono? Your one. It's like start from the building block, start from I'm a thinking thing, and then work up from there, and then you'll eventually know everything from
that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what Descartes did, wasn't it? It's just strip back what can I know indubitably, and then we're working it from there. But yeah, and the reason I bring in the scientific method is that when I'm looking at the world around me, what's the best method I can use to arrive at some kind of, when I'm dealing with evidence, to arrive at some kind of conclusion, together with philosophy. But yeah.
But it's also very easily weaponized. I think we've all seen the weaponization of skepticism and of skeptical culture. So it's the language that denialists of HIV/AIDS use, or anthropogenic climate change, for example. So I think a really important part of this, and one that we do very little to try and address or develop, is at the bottom of it all, no matter what it is, you have to be able to, you have to have the capacity to privilege what the truth is or what the truth might be over your own ego. And because if you don't do that, then none of this matters. The methods, the rational means, the standards of evidence, it's all garbage if you don't have the will to actually use them. And the will includes the ability to privilege the truth over your own ego and the suffering that could ensue if you don't do that. And we don't talk about how to, well, there's people working on this. I think the Center for Applied Rationality and maybe a few others are sort of looking into this. Peter Boghossian, I would say, but that it has to start there. It has to start in the emotions. It has to start in the culture and in the norms and how we raise our kids and what we teach in school about the relationship between truth and ego. But right now we really don't do that, I don't think.
That's a really good point, and I think that's this kind of work of your psychology, your skeptical, or your psychologists such as Jonathan Haidt and people like that look at because at the end of the day, anything you believe, which is your ego, what you think about yourself, is psychology, isn't it? So, I think I said this to you last time, Tom, when I go and do talks about free will, if I've got lots of Christians in the audience, I'll say this is all pointless, because the more evidence I give you against your position, the more entrenched you'll become. As the research to show this is basically just going to wind you up, and you're going to go in and become entrenched. So therefore, what Ed is so beautifully saying there is the ability of someone in that audience to put their ego out of the way there, and that actually take account of what's being said is hugely important. That goes for all of us, and I hope at Skeptic Inc. we're all quite aware of that, or at least we should be.
Right, we've got about 10 minutes left, so one quick question I want to ask. Well, it's not really a quick question because it could set up a huge debate. Is do you think that skepticism needs something like, say, humanism for some sort of moral guidance, or can skeptics arrive at morality on their own? That's a big question.
It depends what you mean by skepticism needs. I mean, as a movement, that assumes that skepticism is a movement rather than a kind of thought process or whatever you want to define it. But I think if we want society to operate, what we need is philosophical literacy and an understanding of morality is part of that. So if you want humans to operate morally, we have our moral intuitions, but I think we need to sometimes look past that and have some degree of introspection into how morality works, and therefore how we think the world should be and how we think each other should be. And if humanism is that, then that's a good thing. If we get a community cohesion together with an understanding of how best humanity should operate going forward, then I'm all for it.
And Zach, one of the things I wanted to address with you was your last blog post was about assisted dying, which is always framed as a humanist issue. So
yeah,
mainly
because I think it's mainly a humanist issue because people oppose it for religious reasons. Mainly, maybe not in every case, but I think people. I think it's because if people are taking their own lives because they have to, it's not. It doesn't lend itself well to the idea of it's the right time for them or anything like that. That it seems very naturalistic. It seems like we have to do everything. And that's that. Maybe that's some of the motivation for why they disagree with it. But yeah, I think it's a hugely important issue because, you're going to die anyway. You're suffering horribly. it makes so much sense to just say, yeah, why not? Just give you a nice drug to take. It's not going to hurt, or you do it when you want. You can say goodbye at the right time. You're not going to be, completely incapacitated. You can do it in the circumstances you want, when you want. I mean, who can take that away from someone, really? The only argument I've had against it. Sorry.
Zach, I think what's really interesting there is just thinking about this the other day, and people who are against assisted dying or euthanasia or whatever area, this idea that you would take your own life on your own sort of terms, they never have a go at people that maybe want a drink or two, or maybe might go diving or skydiving, anything that they do that could actually endanger their lives in any more way than just living kind of naturally. All these sort of things, eating too much, and this is a choice they make, yet they don't have, the same people don't have a go at those people who are actually acting towards lessening their lives. And someone that takes a drug that lessens their lives very, very quickly, within an hour or whatever, that there's an issue there. There's almost like double standards, or someone that's going to mess around with the natural longevity of their life by doing something or taking supplements, things which might lengthen their lives, is being equally unnatural, just in the other way. So I think there's loads of double standards, but I know that's not what the question was, but I'm sorry.
Well, one thing I want to quickly get in there, I recognise the logical fallacy that the critics of assisted dying use. They say that if you allow assisted dying, then elderly family members are going to be pressured by their relatives to end their own lives. And I think, well, one, where is the evidence for that claim? And two, that's a slippery slope argument. So
yeah, and it's also talking about, I mean, they're talking about bad doctors who will put pressure on, but the point, firstly, it's ignorant of the actual proposition, which is that it's going to have to go through, I think, something like 3 independent doctors. It's going to be a pretty rigorous process. It's not going to be just, oh yeah, you can kill yourself. Go right ahead in that room over there. It's going to be you have to sign loads of forms. I think even Dignitas in Switzerland has that. You have to months of preparation. You have to sign everything. It's very very formal. Yes, that's not true. But also, I mean, okay, say you've got a bad doctor. Say it gets to that stage where a bad doctor does that. That doctor is committing a crime. You can't say, well, because someone might commit a crime, we can't do it at all. Because that's just, it's like saying because we might look up someone, wrongly, we shouldn't look up anyone. We should just let crime go because we might prosecute the wrong person. We can say that about anything. It's about but that is literally the only argument I've heard against it. So unless that's a good argument, unless someone can come up with anything else, I haven't even really heard an explicit religious argument. I think all the religious people have been using that argument.
Just for Ed's benefit and for those not from Britain that might be listening, at the moment assisted dying is being discussed very much in a legal and political framework at the moment, with potentially it being written into law somewhere further down the line.
Well, we are very near the end of the show, so I do want to just have a quick indulgence in one piece of good news that affects us in Britain and anyone who's ever worked in education. Certainly something Jono's written about, and that is Michael Gove is no longer Secretary of Education. So, Jono, as a teacher, what do you make of that news?
This is it's absolutely bloody brilliant, right? You've got this right-wing political libertarian that's trying to decentralize education, trying to make schools be accountable to themselves, to have the freedom to do what they want. So you're going to have just this massive variety in schools. They can teach what they want, so it's an open door for creationism and crazy funky shit to come in through the back door. However, teachers universally hate Michael Gove more than any other human on earth. He's been the most hated education minister ever, education secretary, but he's been replaced by Nicky Morgan, who has supported every single thing he voted for, and has also voted against same-sex marriage bill, and is also a committed Christian who has right-wing nut job tendencies. So we've replaced one right-wing nut job with another right-wing nut job, and it's kind of like, yay, oh, bollocks. So
Exactly.
there you go.
More of the same thing, more of the same thing. Right, at this stage, I always give my guests an opportunity to plug whatever they want. I think it's going to be fairly obvious this week, so Ed, if you'd like to plug whatever you want, feel free.
Oh, okay. Well, I blog, of course, at Incredulous on Skeptic Inc., so check me out, and I hope some of you will definitely enjoy the book, including there are many things in the book that we haven't even scratched on that I think are fantastic, like Rebecca Bradley talking about pseudo-archaeology, so check it out.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's available on Amazon and Kobo, hopefully. I tried to get it on Kobo, but it only gave me a
There we go.
Kindle.
Yeah.
There we are. I tried to get it on Kobo, but it only gave me the preview.
And the tree-killing version coming soon.
It's
Right.
definitely on there because we've sold some on Kobo, so.
Ah, fantastic. Okay, great. Well, I think that is the end of the show. Thanks for watching, everyone. I shall see you next time, so keep an eye on skepticcanary.com. But for now, it's goodbye from Ed Clint.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
No problem. It's goodbye from John O'Pearce.
Thank you very much for having us, and please get hold of the 13 Reasons to Doubt or any brilliant Jonathan Pierce books.
There you go. Now there's some plugging. Excellent. And it's goodbye, and I assume good night from No Time because it's about 3 a.m. there, isn't it?
It is 3 a.m. Yeah. So I apologise. It's a bit baby.
No problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Cheers, Tom. Thank you.
No problem. Fantastic. Keep an eye on skepticcanary.com for the podcast. I shall see you on a future show. Bye, everyone.